Assalamualaikum and welcome to the Hardborn Islamic Studies Circle HISC Seerah session 231, continuing with the recaps during this blessed month of Ramadan. Last week we did sessions 34 through to 38, where we talked about the vile persecutions of the Prophet ﷺ. It gave lots of examples of that. One of the one of the assassination attempts where somebody tried to strangle the Prophet ﷺ. This led to the first migration to Abyssinia of the Muslims, about 16 Muslims, and then they came back when they falsely thought that the Quraish had converted, and then you get the issue of the so-called satanic verses, and then we talked about how the Muslims then started with their second migration to Abyssinia, this time a whole load more, over 100 Muslims. So moving on to session 39, what we talked about was that so a couple of the other stories with regards to the migrants was obviously because they'd lost their citizenship. When they went to Abyssinia, they had to get protection when they came back. So one of the stories was Uthman ibn Affan. He asked one of his business partners, al-Walid, for protection to re-enter Mecca, and then he received that protection from al-Walid to re-enter Mecca. But then when he's in Mecca, he sees the Muslims being persecuted, and he feels guilty that he's got protection, whereas the rest of the Muslims are still being persecuted and subject to torture, etc., etc. So then he asks Walid to publicly rescind his protection. So Walid says, was there anything that I did that was wrong? He goes, no, it's not that. It's just that everyone else is being tortured, whereas and I'm sort of safe and I don't feel comfortable with it. So then he got al-Walid to rescind it in a sort of no fault manner, so publicly saying that the withdrawal of the protection is through no fault of al-Walid, and that was fine. Later on then Uthman attends a poetry recital. So it's a big event, some top poets coming all over to recite their poetry. One elite poet, he starts reciting it, and then obviously the crowd agrees with things, and then Uthman agrees with it, and then there's some verses in his poetry which Uthman disagrees with, something like the everything will vanish, whatever. So and so Uthman starts to heckle this poet because what he says is technically un-Islamic, and so people are really dumbfounded, and basically they turn on Uthman and start beating him up. And then al-Walid finds out and says, look, do you want me to reinstate your protection? And he goes, no, I'm fine as it is. There was another story of the Prophet's cousin, Abu Talha, who asked for protection from Abu Talib, as opposed to from Abu Jahl, because he's from Abu Jahl's tribe on his father's side. He should, by right, ask for protection from Abu Jahl, but he asked for protection on his mother's side and from Abu Talib, because obviously they're competing tribes, Banu Hashim and Banu Makhzum. So Abu Jahl feels that his prestige has been slighted by the fact that Abu Talha sought protection from Abu Talib. So he then confronts Abu Talib and says, look, why is this happening? And Abu Talib says, look, I've given protection to one nephew, I can give it to the other nephew. So there's some sort of controversies around that. And as we said, the second migration, it's over 100 Muslims went, and this is a big point. This is the vast majority of Muslims. They left for Abyssinia. Maybe 150 Muslims max at the time in Mecca. 100 of them have gone to Abyssinia, and these are notably the more elite, the noble classes, the middle classes, and this is really bad PR for the Quraish. So they dispatch Amr ibn al-Aas to go and negotiate the extradition of these Muslims back to Mecca. So Amr ibn al-Aas, who's a very cultured nobleman, he then goes to the court of al-Najashi, the Negus. He bribes the ministers with lots of gifts the night before. Then he goes into the court of Najashi and says, basically, these guys, can you hand them over because they're trouble causers and they're foolish and they've made up a new religion. So then the Muslims are summoned to the court and they appoint Jafar ibn Abi Talib as their spokesperson, as their emir. As he walks in, he doesn't bow to the Najashi, because we only prostrate to the Prophet ﷺ. Sorry, we only prostrate to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as the Prophet ﷺ demanded from us. And Amr ibn al-As, he had tipped off the Najashi in the court that, you know, these people are so arrogant they won't even bow to you. So the Najashi, he inquires about them and asks them about their beliefs and what is all this business, because he knows Amr ibn al-As and he's got a long-term sort of understanding of these people from Mecca. So then Jafar, he starts to explain the reasons why, and then we talked in the study circle about how to structure an argument by analysing the way Jafar ibn Abi Talib did, and the ways, in a really good, strong way. I don't need other TED Talks to tell you this, to recognise how to construct a good argument is, again, following these rules. So Jafar, he started off with a story of who they were. He then went to explain the other side of the argument, what these people say and claim. He then refuted that, and then he brought his own facts and his own narrative and linked it back to their story of who they were and how they are different now. So with that speech, Jafar, he silences the plots by the Quraishi delegation to have them extradited, but then the Najashi asks for some evidence of this revelation. You claim you've got a prophet, you know, with revelation. Can I hear some of it? So then Jafar, he famously recites the verses from Surah Maryam, and the whole court starts to cry because of what is said and the way it's said. And then with that, Najashi refuses to hand over the refugees and asylum seekers, and he, in fact, he gives them his personal protection to the Muslims. And some of the lessons we talked about from this is never compromise Islam. The ends in Islam do not justify the means. The method and the outcome need to be from Islam. You need to have evidence for those things. Also, we shouldn't distort Islam in order to please the enemies. We should understand the audience, and it's important to account the leaders or the elite in order to change public opinion. So Jafar, he was accounting the Quraish in terms of their evil, and he's trying to change public opinion, and that is a really important lesson for us. Then session 40, we did some more about the Muslims in Abyssinia. So this is the part 2 of the story. So as Amr ibn al-As, he's leaving the court of Najashi dejected, without having fulfilled his mission. He then goes to his companion and says, I'm going to come back tomorrow and I've got an ace up my sleeve and I've got a killer argument. And so the next day he begs for another session with the Najashi, and then he says, look, you know, these guys, you can't have them in your territory because they blaspheme against Jesus. So then the Muslims are summoned back to court, and on this occasion they feel really threatened, because they've got an armed guard bringing them back to the court, and they're going to be interrogated yet again. But then Jafar, he decides to explain the beliefs that the Muslims have about Isa being a prophet, being the Messiah, being born miraculously. And then Najashi is reassured by all of this, and he states that this is close to their belief, and then he subsequently gives them further full protection, and worse than that, he sends the emissaries back in disgrace by returning all the gifts, not only the gifts that they'd given to him, but the gifts that they'd given to all the ministers at court. So this was a PR disaster for the Quraish, that they've been thoroughly humiliated in front of the Najashi, and obviously everyone gets to hear about that. Then it's quite possible that because of the Najashi's sort of soft spot for the Muslims, he may then have even had some secret interactions with the Muslims, and people in the court found out about this, so they started to plot a way of overthrowing the Najashi, or they may be using this as an excuse to overthrow him, because there's always, you know, power dynamics in all of these arenas. And so there may have been an anti-Najashi group that used this as a way to try and galvanize support against the Najashi. So they started spreading rumors that he'd become a secret Muslim, or he's abandoned his beliefs. So the Najashi, he hears about these rumors, and he summons all the elite back to his court. And then he challenges them, well, you know, why are you, you know, plotting against me? And then some of them say that, you know, it's claimed that you have abandoned your religion. Look how you treated these Muslims. So then he responds, well, what are your beliefs? And they go through their beliefs, and then he puts his hand on his heart, and he says, these are my beliefs as well. And again, you know, in our stories, it's that he'd written on a piece of paper that he believes in Allah and that the Prophet ﷺ as the messenger, put that in his pocket. So when he dabbed his heart, the people understood that he was affirming their beliefs, but obviously he was secretly affirming his own belief. But anyhow, he thwarted this plot to overthrow him, this coup attempt. Despite that, because things were so uncertain, it said that he had made some backup plans for the Muslims should he be deposed. So should they overthrow him, he arranged for the Muslims to leave straight away from where they're staying, and he'd chartered a boat for them. And so he gave them instructions that if you hear that things have gone against me, go make your way straight to this boat and this port, and the captain's going to take you wherever you want to go. But that thankfully didn't transpire. And the other thing we know about the Najashi is that he died as a Muslim, and on the day of his death, Jibril came to the Prophet ﷺ informing him of the death of the Najashi, and the Prophet ﷺ did, for the first time in his life, a janaza in absentia. So they prayed over somebody whose body wasn't there, because obviously he's in Abyssinia, the Prophet ﷺ's in Medina at the time. And so again, we talked about some of the faraid. This is a fard kifaya to do a janaza, as opposed to some other fard ains, which are individual obligations on Muslims. The other things that we talked about in the study circle, session 40, was the difference between Dar-ul Islam, Dar-ul Kufr, and also we mentioned Dar-ul Harb as well. And the other things to talk about was that as Muslims, citizens in a foreign land, there are things we can learn from this example. The Muslims there, they didn't preach to overthrow the regime in Abyssinia, they didn't cause disruption in Abyssinia, but they did use the local system to protect their rights. And the actions of the Muslims there is not a carte blanche for Muslims here to basically get involved with anything in terms of politics. These are specific rulings and regulations defining how they interacted and lived their life in Abyssinia, knowing that there was a head of state and a leader in Mecca and obviously in Medina when Islam had been established. The next two sessions, we talked about the conversion of Hamza and the conversion of Umar. So, session 41, we talked about how the Muslims that had returned, the 16 or so Muslims that had returned from Abyssinia, they gave a really good description of the life in Abyssinia, which they're free from persecution, they can practice their Islam, they're treated with respect, and this was in stark contrast to how the Muslims were being persecuted in Mecca. So second time round, this explains why more than 100 people had left for Abyssinia, but that left only maybe 40 or 50 maximum Muslims in Mecca, and many of those were the poor or the slave classes that weren't rich enough to leave for Abyssinia. And we talked about some of the exceptions like Abu Bakr and Musab ibn Umair and Uthman, who had initially, all three of them had decided to go, but on this occasion they decided to stay in Mecca and not be part of the second migration. Then we talked about how on one occasion Abu Jahl, again being emboldened by the fact that there were very few Muslims now, he became very aggressive towards the Prophet ﷺ. So on one occasion he was aggressively taunting the Prophet ﷺ, shouting at the Prophet ﷺ and criticizing the Prophet ﷺ, his lineage, Banu Hashim, and everything surrounding the Prophet ﷺ. And then on top of that, the Prophet ﷺ didn't respond, so then he just picked up some stones, started throwing them at the Prophet ﷺ. And one of the stones hit the Prophet ﷺ, caused a gash on his head and caused him some bleeding. Then Abu Jahl, he strutted back to his gathering where all his mates were in Dar-ul. We talked about that, sort of the quasi town hall or parliament area, and he started bragging at what he had done. Then other people who were there from Banu Hashim, they were very upset at how the Prophet ﷺ had been treated, even though they're not Muslims. So when Hamza, the uncle of the Prophet ﷺ, had returned from one of his hunting trips, he's there with his bow and arrow, fresh from hunting. He goes, and as is the ritual when people return from these trips, he went to the Kaaba to do tawaf. As he's there doing tawaf, he's getting accosted by people from his tribe to say, where were you? Abu Jahl, who's obviously from Banu Makhzum, he's been insulting your nephew. He said this, he said that, and who's going to defend us? And then Hamza said, did anyone contradict Abu Jahl? And they said no. Did anyone admonish him? They said no. And so from his sort of tribal understanding, his tribal culture kicked in, where he was enraged that somebody from another tribe had insulted somebody from his tribe. So in a fit of rage, Hamza, he marches over to Abu Jahl, who sat in Dar-ul Nadwa, and he sees Abu Jahl, and he's very agitated, and so he takes his bow and slaps Abu Jahl in the face, causing Abu Jahl's face to bleed, and for him to obviously recoil in surprise. And then because Hamza from Banu Hashim had struck Abu Jahl, one of the leaders from Banu Makhzum, both sort of tribal allegiances, they're starting to sort of get uppity, and there's going to be a big face-off in sort of the town hall parliament area in Dar-ul Nadwa. And then Abu Jahl, he calms everything down and says, look, no, calm down. I overstepped the mark. I said things which I shouldn't have said to the Prophet ﷺ. It was wrong of me. So he admitted it. Things got calmed down. Then Hamza, he retorted to Abu Jahl, how dare you do that? What are you going to do? I have been, you do this to the Prophet ﷺ because he's a Muslim. I am now a Muslim. And he said that without actually thinking, just as a way to get back at Abu Jahl. And so when he declared that he is a Muslim, everyone is caught in surprise and they're panicked. What is this about? And so Hamza realized what he'd said, and then he goes back home, and then he's actually quite disturbed that he's now publicly announced in front of everyone that he is now a Muslim. He needs a way out because he's not a Muslim. He just said that out of tribal allegiance. So he makes a dua to Allah, oh Allah, please guide me. If you want to bring my heart to Islam, then do that. If you don't, then take my life tonight. So he has a restless night, And then the next morning he wakes up, he realizes he's still alive, and he sees that as a sign that he should become a Muslim. So he goes over to the Prophet ﷺ and explains everything that happened, how, in terms of what happened the day before, and his interaction with Abu Jahl and what he said. And then the Prophet ﷺ, he sat down his uncle Hamza, and he then started to explain to him what Islam is, what it's about. Then Hamza's listening, and then he decides to genuinely convert and to become a Muslim. And then we finished off the study circle by talking about how we should be tolerant of the reasons people become Muslim, and people become Muslim for a variety of reasons. It's not always initially for the genuine love of Islam and seeking repentance and closeness to Allah. However, later on they may become closer to Islam. So we should support new converts or reverts and make it easier for them to be good Muslims, and not to judge them as to the reason why they became Muslim. So the next session, the last session for sort of recap today, is the lovely story of the conversion of Umar ibn al-Khattab. And again, this is a beautiful story. Many of us know this. And just in brief, what we know about Umar, and this is 5 years into or after revelation had started. Umar, he's one of the sort of sub-tribes of the Quraish, one of their leaders. He's known for his love of alcohol, for his wrestling, for being outspoken, and he's known for torturing Muslims, because he just goes with the flow. Everyone else is doing that, so he tortures some of his slaves who are Muslims. And then we talked a couple of weeks ago about the story of his conversation with Layla. She's packing to go to Abyssinia, and he goes, well, why are you packing everything? And she goes, well, because you've driven us to this because of your torturing and persecution. And he goes, well, has the matter gone that far? I didn't realize. May Allah make the journey easy for you. And she goes home, explains that to her husband, and he says, look, there's no more likelihood of his donkey becoming a Muslim before he becomes a Muslim. Don't think that he's suddenly got a soft spot for the Muslims. So the Umar later on explains his journey to Islam. He says that one day he came back from one of his trips. He's looking for his mates, and he wants to go chill with them, go have a drink with them. So he goes downtown, can't find his mates. So then he decides, because none of them were around, he decides to go to the Kaaba and do tawaf, because that's what people do. So as he's going to do the tawaf, he sees the Prophet ﷺ there praying, and he goes, well, this is my time, maybe I can sort of rough up the Prophet ﷺ. So then he hides behind the cloth of the Kaaba and sneaks around, try to be out of sight, and it's dark in the evening, and then he's sort of face to face with the Prophet ﷺ. He's hid behind the cloth. Prophet ﷺ, he's down on the floor praying, not knowing that Umar is hiding behind the cloth. So then Umar, he starts to think about the Prophet ﷺ and why he's caused so much trouble. And as thoughts are coming into his mind, the Prophet ﷺ is, incidentally, obviously it's Qadr of Allah, reciting some of the final verses from Surah Haqqa. And these verses that he's reciting directly rebut the actual thoughts that Umar had at that point in time. So one of the thoughts that Umar had was, obviously this guy, he's saying these things, he must be a poet. And from the recitation, the Qur'an says, obviously he's not a poet. And then Umar says, well, okay, fine, he's not a poet, then he must be a magician. And the Prophet ﷺ recites the next verse, which says, he's not a soothsayer, he's not a magician. And so Umar goes, oh my gosh. And then he says, oh, you must be making it all up. And then the next verse that the Prophet ﷺ recites is that verily he is not somebody who makes it up, but it is a revelation. And this sort of blows Umar's mind. It's like, he feels that the Prophet ﷺ is reading his mind, even though he doesn't know he's there. And then it said that the Prophet ﷺ then made a dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to either bring one of the two Umars closer to Islam, as in Umar ibn al-Khattab, or Abu Jahl, and his actual name was Amr. So he said, either bring these two people closer to Islam, because he recognized the leadership qualities innate in these two individuals. And so actually the next day or a few days after that, Abu Jahl, he puts a bounty of 100 camels on the neck of the Prophet ﷺ. So he says, whoever kills the Prophet ﷺ, I will give them 100 camels. And Umar's in that gathering. He says, okay, maybe I'll do that. And then he goes out and gets his sword and is dragging his sword through the streets of Mecca, looking for the Prophet ﷺ. Obviously, very focused, intent in his eyes. And as he's scouring the streets of Mecca looking for the Prophet ﷺ, he's in his safe house, which is in Dar-ul. Nobody knows about that. So he can't find the Prophet ﷺ. He's venturing street to street. He stumbles across a Muslim who's a secret Muslim, and who said, look, what are you up to? Why are you wandering around like this? And he goes, well, I'm looking for the Prophet ﷺ. Obviously he says Muhammad, because I want to kill him. And so this secret Muslim, he's obviously quite taken aback by that, because this Umar, he's there with his sword. He's got focus and intent in his eyes. So he turns to him as well, rather than focusing on the Prophet, why don't you sort your own house first? And he goes, what do you mean? Your sister has become Muslim. So Umar, enraged even more by this, by the indignity of his own family becoming Muslim, he marches over to the house of Fatima, his sister, and storms in, and he hears them reciting something. So Fatima and her husband Said, they're being taught by Khabab. He quickly hides in sort of one of the cupboards, and Umar, he storms in and says, what was that you were reciting? And she denies it all, and then he goes, what's this about this rumor you've become a Muslim? And then they start having some argy-bargy, and then Umar, he lunges at his brother-in-law, his sister's husband. He misses him and then accidentally punches his sister in the face. She starts to bleed. He's sort of overcome with remorse, and then he calms down, and then she blurts out, yes, I'm a Muslim, what are you going to do about it? And then he goes, well, he apologizes, says, what was that thing you're reading? Let me read it. And she goes, no, you can't read it. You're not even clean. You need to go have a bath and come back purified, which he does. He comes back and then he starts reading the Qur'an. And then he realizes this is something magical, at which point Khabab bursts out of the closet and says, I only heard yesterday the Prophet ﷺ saying, making a dua to Allah, oh Allah, please make one of the two Ummahs Muslim. And then he goes, okay, fine, I want to become a Muslim now. Where do I find the Prophet ﷺ? So Khabab, he then tells the Prophet ﷺ, go to the house of Arqam, you will find him there. So Umar, he walks over to the house of Arqam. He's still got the sword in his hand, knocks on the door, and then people, they look outside, they see Hamza with a sword, everyone panics, and the Prophet ﷺ says, who's gonna greet him? He's there with the sword. Hamza says, well, I'm gonna go and greet him, and if he's here for bad intentions, I'll use his own sword to kill him. This is Hamza gonna challenge Umar. So Hamza greets him and he says, look, I want to become a Muslim. And then the Prophet ﷺ, he goes and he grabs Umar by his clothes, by his neck, drags him down and says, how long are you going to be like this? Become a Muslim. And at which point Umar says, yes, that's what I'm here to do. And he becomes a Muslim. As soon as he becomes a Muslim, the Prophet ﷺ says, Takbir. And then everyone in the house, they all shout Allahu Akbar, and then they realize that actually we've given away our safe house, and they all disperse quietly. So then Umar, he's not shy of the fact that he has become a Muslim, so he heads over to Abu Jahl and tells him to his face, I have become a Muslim. Abu Jahl slams the door in his face. Then he goes to somebody who is known to be the gossip monger. of the town, and he tells him, can I tell you a secret? Don't tell anyone. I've become a Muslim, knowing full well that this person, he will go spread the news, which is exactly what he did. This person started running through the streets saying, Umar's become a Muslim, Umar's become a Muslim. There's a big commotion. People start gathering outside the house of Umar to find out what's happened and to maybe try and sort of beat him up. There's a big crowd that gathers there. Then al-Aas, the father of Amr ibn al-Aas, he says, why are you going to do this just because someone's become a Muslim? And he gives public protection to Umar after he has converted. Then we talked about the story where Umar gets his name of Umar al-Faruq, the one who discerns between right and wrong. He then challenged the Prophet ﷺ and challenged the Muslims, said, look, aren't we on the right path? Aren't we Muslims? Why do we have to do everything in secret? We should make our beliefs more public. And so the Prophet ﷺ agrees, and so they organize a public demonstration, right? First of its kind ever in Mecca to happen like this. And the Prophet ﷺ organizes two columns. On the head of one column is Hamza, on the head of the other column is Umar ibn al-Khattab, and they march through the streets of Mecca in a defiance as a public demonstration. And the Prophet ﷺ, he is in between the middle of the two columns, and they go through the streets of Mecca and they end up at the Kaaba, and then the Prophet ﷺ leads them in prayer. And this was the first time most of the Muslims had publicly been allowed to pray, and they felt emboldened now that they've got Hamza and Umar as their spokespeople, defenders at their helm. So this had a monumental impact on changing the public opinion through this active demonstration at the time. So we'll finish there, inshallah, in terms of the stories from previous study circles. Next time, inshallah, we'll talk about the backlash from the Quraish, some of the final negotiations, and then on to the boycott, and maybe even the death of Khadija and the death of Abu Talib, which are coming up, inshallah, in the Seerah. So until then, do remember in your du'as to continue with your ibadah. May Allah accept our ibadah from throughout this Ramadan, especially these special nights. May Allah allow us to find Laylatul Qadr, inshallah. And until next time, do remember us in your du'as. والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. جزاك الله خير. السلام عليكم.